Hi there, assessment students. It's Dr. Ryder. This is the second of two videos that I wanted to share with you in lieu of our class that was canceled last Wednesday, the 14th of March, since I was out sick. And so this slideshow or video deals with this question of how do we measure quality in higher education? And some politicians and consumer advocates and even those of us in higher education, I think sometimes wish that it were as easy to measure quality in higher education as it might be to give stars or thumbs up or to leave a Yelp type review as a way in which to kind of measure and then to convey a sense of quality in the product that we offer in higher education. But of course, it's not that simple. And if it was, wouldn't it be great if we could, actually do that and, kind of give two thumbs up or 5 stars or what have you, based on how we think or feel. There's also, of course, if you're familiar with Black Mirror, um, there, an episode that kind of deals with that, with, kind of rating people up or down, kind of opens the door to some things that could be kind of disturbing. At any rate, some of the traditional hallmarks of institutional quality or ways that we have of kind of measuring quality in higher education have included some measures that might strike us as being somewhat similar to business or business practices, such as sound fiscal management or return on investment, which might be captured as an expression of earnings for a graduate compared to the cost that they spend on their education. We have certainly some traditional measures of quality that we're probably pretty familiar with in our work in higher education and students in the higher education program, such as measures of student learning, um, concepts related to student retention and persistence from one year to the next. Um, Certainly, institutions are and have been measured on the adherence to and fulfillment of their expressed and stated missions. And we also have expectations that institutions might be run or governed well, and there might be a sense of stability in institutional governance. Where there's not rapid changes between leaders or governing boards that are upsetting the apple cart necessarily. And some things that we look at more recently that have been emphasized, such as community engagement, and how well does an institution engage with its community or with its region. And certainly that's been a concern and something that we've been focused on here at UNCW. What's great, of course, is, and you're in a course about assessment, assessment is a process and gives us a set of tools that we can use to understand and demonstrate institutional quality. We can apply assessment skills when it comes to looking at return on investment, measures of student learning, of course, retention and persistence, but also things related to mission, community engagement. And we could probably create assessment models and processes to capture fiscal management and institutional governance. But I think you kind of get the idea. The assessment gives you a set of skills or arrows in your quiver, if you will, to have a sense of what institutional quality actually looks like. So the shoe text discusses different modes of comparison as a way of ensuring quality. And one form of comparison that applies to all 2 and 4 year institutions that you've either attended or may likely work at is accreditation. And accreditation is, of course, a process of comparing institutional performance, measuring that against standards that have been agreed upon by experts. So accreditation, measuring institutional performance against a set of standards agreed upon by experts. The use of accreditation, and particularly standards developed by experts to measure institutional quality, can be traced back to Abraham Flexner's nationwide evaluation of medical education in the United States. It was conducted on behalf of the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching in 1910. And at the end of the 19th century, what you should understand is that medical education was essentially a hodgepodge of hospital-based, some college-based, and then some training that was provided by essentially snake oil salesmen And in most states, there was less education required of physicians, surgeons, or medical specialists than teachers, lawyers, or business people, other professions or occupations that we would consider to be um, requiring lesser skill than, than practicing medicine. And Flexner's um, Flexner's report essentially kind of looked at the status of medical education across the United States and challenged these standards and established principles nationwide that medical education should be university-based, so it should occur in a university setting, and it should be grounded in scientific knowledge. Imagine that medicine should be grounded or based in some form of science. And the result was to improve educational quality and patient outcomes, but also wound up closing nearly half of all quote-unquote medical schools in the United States. And again, some of them, it was essentially you finished up your preparatory schooling up to the point of high school, and you could have gone for 2 years and gotten a medical degree and practiced medicine in some states in the United States. So this was kind of the earliest manifestation of accreditation. Now, today, while medical schools are certainly accredited, along with schools for education or schools of business, so on and so forth, 2-year institutions in the United States are also accredited, each by one of 6 regional accrediting organizations. And the process, of course, is sometimes referred to as regional accreditation. Now, our region here in the Southeast includes states from Virginia down to Texas, so the area in red, plus institutions in Mexico and Latin America that choose to maintain U.S. accreditation for the purposes of reciprocity and transfer credit. But we are accredited by the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools, and schools here refer to K-12 institutions, but we're obviously focused on the college aspect. Accreditation is essential to institutional legitimacy. So institutions, in terms of getting accreditation and keeping it, it's vitally important to institutional legitimacy and institutional existence, quite frankly. Accreditation is a private, non-governmental function. So it's not something that's conducted or run by state or federal government, but the federal government, through the Department of Education, Congress, and state governments, certainly are interested in what goes on with accreditation, and they keep pretty close tabs on the process. Institutions that either fail to become accredited or fail to maintain their accreditation can suffer some pretty significant consequences. Most severe being lack then of being able to access federal dollars, whether it's receiving financial aid disbursements. So then students students registered at those institutions would not receive financial aid. They would not be eligible for it. So students are going to kind of take their money where they can actually get it and spend it, because only accredited institutions, according to statute and regulations from the Department of Education, can receive federal funds. Also, institutions for access programs to fund research, construction projects, any sort of federal disbursement of aid must be done to an accredited institution. The other thing that's kind of important to keep in mind is that transcripts from accredited institutions are what's required in order to transfer to another school, get a job, typically, where the employer asks for a transcript, and apply for graduate school. So not attending an accredited institution can be difficult in the sense that you could not get money in terms of financial aid to attend, but then when you're trying to get to graduate school or to get a job thereafter, you could find your options fairly limited because of your lack of a degree from an accredited program or an accredited institution. So it's kind of a big deal. Accreditation occurs in the United States through regional accreditation over what we would call a decennial or 10-year cycle, which has kind of 3 specific kind of points on the timeline that I want to highlight here. The first being, being reaffirmed. If you're an accredited institution, during the cycle you have your accreditation reaffirmed. Then at some point around the 5th, well, not around, but in the 5th year of this 10-year cycle, you host visitors or accreditors from the agency come to campus to kind of make sure that everything is going as it should. And then as you get ready to kind of complete this 10-year cycle, you host visitors from the accrediting body again for a reaffirmation visit. In the middle, so years 3 and 4 and then years 7 to 9, there's this process whereby members of the campus come together in a committee fashion to gather evidence, to write a self-study report, and then send that off to the folks who will be visiting either for the 5th year visit in years 3 and 4 or ahead of the reaffirmation visit between years 7 and 9. And of course, once that's all done, once we kind of get to this reaffirmation visit, you hear down at the end, the process repeats. So it's something that institutions spend quite a bit of time and effort going through, and can matter quite a bit in terms of that. What institutions are required to show evidence of are a series of, at least this is within our region, the Southern Association, a set of core requirements which serve as the basic threshold for achieving accreditation, and a set of comprehensive standards which are expected levels of accomplishment higher or greater than the core requirements that are needed to remain accredited. So to achieve accreditation, you have to hit the core requirements. To maintain accreditation, you have to hit these expected levels of accomplishment in terms of a set of comprehensive standards. Just to kind of go through some of these quite quickly, the core requirements cover things such as the minimum requirements for a governing board, the fact that the CEO or the chancellor or the president of the institution has to be separate from the governing board, with separate responsibilities and kind of a separation of powers, if you will. There has to be a sense of a published mission. There has to be an ongoing and integrated process for assessing the mission, goals, and outcomes. Some of the core requirements also include the fact that the institution has to be in continuous operation, that students must currently actually be enrolled in programs. There must be degree programs that are compatible with the institution. There must be a program for general education that consists of at least 15 credits at a 2-year institution or 30 credits at a 4-year institution. And that the institution needs to provide all instruction for at least one degree program, which, you might say, of course, wouldn't the institution provide all instruction for at least one degree program? But if you've ever heard of diploma mills, that's where you might have this kind of a thing come in, where an institution is producing diplomas or producing degrees, but isn't providing any sort of instruction in terms of actually educating people around that degree. There's also a kind of a fad with a lot of the growth of online programs for institutions to outsource education responsibilities. UNCW's nursing program does some of that through a company called Academic Partnerships, which I think is a little sketchy, and there's not a lot of information out there about what's going on. And I'm not saying that it's sketchy, but it seems a little different than the way that education might be provided elsewhere through UNCW. Each program has to have a sufficient number of appropriately credentialed faculty. There has to be library and learning support services adequate to instructional research and public service programs. There must be adequate support and activities to promote student learning and development. So the student affairs mission matters quite a bit. The ability to support students in appropriate ways, but also to do, both the curricular and the co-curricular program matter as part of the assessment process or the accreditation process. And there must be a sound fiscal base or financial base for demonstrated financial stability, as well as physical resources, so plant, equipment, buildings that are appropriate to the mission and scope. Things have to be well maintained. You can't have an institution that's essentially renting out a warehouse and has an address on Google Maps, but no sort of kind of real campus or operational base to speak of. So that gives you a little bit of background on accreditation. It's incredibly important in the sense that the work that you're providing your clients, I'm not saying that it will be used for accreditation, but some of it could be in some cases. So you can imagine that this has political implications, which we'll talk about in class the next time we see each other. Take care.